Okay, I'm going to get started here. Other people will join in the next couple of minutes. So my name is Don Bowman. My company is Agilicus, and we look after zero trust for critical infrastructure. And that includes industrial networks, industrial control systems. And today I'm going to talk about a very specific class of problem which relates to vendor access, third parties, partners, system integrators, people that support you that need to use part of your infrastructure, but maybe not all of it. And particularly what we're going to talk today is about this friction. And there's this friction in the industrial network, and part of it comes from they usually have relatively weak internal security and air gap style lockdowns as a consequence. So, more than any other network, the industrial network treats the inside as infinitely trusted and the outside as infinitely untrusted. And that model is coming under threat. And it's coming under threat because we have vendors that are manufacturing products that might need access in order to operate the equipment. It might be part of the contract. It might be part of how they get upgraded. It might be just for mean time to repair, preventative maintenance. We have shared accounts versus accountability. That's another big one. Do all the PCs have a login called SCADA, or is it individual users? Does the HMI have a login, or is it just whoever can walk up to it? That's a big friction point is, when you have personal accountability, it helps you a lot on audit and things. When you have shared account, it's help you on efficiency, that friction point. Multi-factor versus not even a single factor versus single sign-on. Best practice today is single sign-on. You use one set of credentials for your entire universe, for your email, for your industrial system, for your timesheet, etc. Whereas a lot of legacy systems have local application passwords, and they just don't participate in that model. It gets challenging when you start to stretch it out into third parties. Second thing I'm going to talk about is intrinsic issues associated with one of the ways you get access from A to B in networks, which is a VPN, a tunnel, etc. And the first is you can have a problem called overlapping IP space. My laptop in my company uses 10.1 for something, and in your company you use 10.1 for something. When we VPN together, I lose access to my local name server or printer. We talk about client software. Your decision might be to use Cisco AnyConnect version 3.2.1, and some other customer might use AnyConnect 3.2.3, and your poor vendor can't install both of them at the same time. The other problem with the VPN is it's an overbroad access. It's kind of like a long Ethernet cable. Just imagine throwing a really long cable somewhere, and once it's connected, it's very difficult to do audit who did what on it. But it's much harder to restrict who can get where. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a proposed solution, which is how single sign-on with zero trust and central authorization can actually improve efficiency and solve some of these friction points for you. I know nobody ever believes me that security will improve efficiency. Today, I hope to make you a believer. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges. So the industrial equipment challenge. It has long lifespans, 15 plus years versus 3 years for your laptop. That has a lot of implications on software, patching, maintenance, upgrades, whether the vendor is even still in business anymore. And that's increasingly an issue because increasingly these things are merging with IT and software technologies. It used to be that industrial equipment was mostly gears and preventative maintenance was changing the oil, and now it's very indistinguishable from what's the difference between a tablet mounted with something NEMA hardened to a pedestal versus a tablet that you carry on the road with you. Not a lot. And what's happening there is those life cycles are coming at each other. It can't be out of service. You can't take your factory floor down or your energy pipeline in order to do maintenance. You can't take it down due to a security issue. So how do you manage that? One of the other challenges is increasingly, I call this the John Deere business model. Increasingly, the equipment can only really be supported by the original manufacturer. The complexity has gone up. There's firmware that needs to be changed. It might be as simple as changing PLC tags or something, but then it starts to get a lot more complicated. Now you're starting to think about my security enclave needs to encompass that of my partners. The main challenge really is that a lot of this equipment really still has no internal security model. Everything needs to talk to everything, and there can't be anything in the way, and it doesn't forward through a firewall nicely because it isn't TCP with HTTP with headers with a JWT. Instead, it's broadcast. What does that mean for my challenge? My challenge being the person in this industrial environment. They're in the water plant with the SCADA and the chemicals going in. They're on the factory floor. They're on the energy pipeline. The first thing is production must produce. So you're there to support production, not to get in the way of it. Which means you really struggle with planned downtime, and you would really even more struggle with unplanned downtime. So from their standpoint, just make it always available, and anything you have to do around security and so on is more of a you problem than a me problem. The next big challenge is patches break things. So, there's a critical security patch, and you look at it and say, I wonder how critical that is, because there's a good chance that it's going to cause that dreaded downtime. Another challenge that we talk about, my team, my partners, they need remote access. That time you spend in a car driving somewhere is inefficient. Things look like they're in trouble right now. Can somebody log in to help me out? Is this just this HMI is reporting this over temperature? What do I need to do? That's mean time to repair. And the other problem is you have a varied set of partners. Some are just individuals. This is a person that I work with. Some are large companies, Siemens, Rockwell. And when you talk about I'm working with Rockwell, it's not an individual, it's a company. And they have a constantly rotating set of staff. You cannot dictate their policies, software, and equipment. You can't really just say, this is how you have to work with me, because they don't have that flexibility. Another big challenge I see a lot is the controls networks. They're not as segmented as people want. So it's really a bit of an all or nothing thing. And the cybersecurity budget, let's face it, is close to zero until something bad happens, in which case money rains for a few days and then it dries up. When we talk about our partners, put yourself in the moccasins of your partner. What is their challenge? So they're going to say, I support hundreds of customers. They each want a different VPN. They each want a different multi-factor. They each want different licensed software in order to do stuff. Their network IPs overlap with mine. It's very complex and expensive to satisfy, the set of needs. I can't necessarily do that. My team changes. I need flexibility. Somebody goes on leave. Somebody comes in. I hire a person. I fire a person. They come and go. I can't really make it about this is always the person that supports you. I just can't do that. And I'm driven to increase efficiency. Drive time is dead time. I'm not getting the billable hours for my top technician to be on a plane to get somewhere. I'm sympathetic to your security needs, but ultimately that's more of a you problem than a me problem. There's a non-answer to this, and I know some people have implemented parts of the non-answer, but you create a shared account per partner company. This is the Rockwell account. You log in as username equals Rockwell, password equals Rockwell with a 0 instead of the O. It's secret. You will never figure it out. Sometimes they create a jump box. Well, there's a dual interface device that straddles the network, and it's got remote desktop. All the software's on it. There's a virtual machine for every contractor. You can just log into that, and once you're into it, it's as if you were in the plant. Some people use that jump box as a VPN onwards. You get to it, and then you VPN into the plant. And often these things have somewhere around it something that looks a lot like passwords.xls. So there's a list of all the internal application passwords. Well, the HMI is logged in this way, that PC is logged in this way, the backup system's this way. And what we do is we just turn a blind eye to the HR changes at our partners and say, well, I assume they're never going to have any staff turnover on negative terms, so therefore I don't have to go change these passwords when they do. This is what's called a total trust model. And there's nothing really wrong with it unless something breaks that trust. Your partners aren't out to get you. It doesn't mean that they're untrustworthy, by their very nature. But that being said, they certainly increase your security risk surface. More people, more change, more churn, more access equals harder to quantify risk. And ultimately, what is risk? It's probability. And what happens with probability is eventually the house wins and you lose. So the outcome of that non-answer is usually fairly bad. Partner A has person B leave on bad terms, and they have your credentials. You might not even be aware of this. A heated shouting match occurs, and somebody's walked out the door by security. They're not going to broadcast that to you and say, hey, this person left on bad terms, go change that shared password you have. Of course not. So now, is there retribution involved? Is that person? This has actually happened. Not that long ago in the U.S., there was a employee walked out and they logged back into the water plant and tried to do some damage. They got caught. They got charged. Partner B clicks on a tempting email link. Like, humans are humans. Email is phishing. The better a story you can construct, hey, this is me, I've had a problem, can you click on this file and help me out? Boom. But the problem is if they're VPN'd into you, that becomes the highway to hell. It just goes straight into you. So now you've imported their business risk into your business. Partner C. Partner C creates an always-on VPN remote. How I know this happens, this is what we did at my last company. We supported a large number of customers who were fairly security conscious and had complicated ways to get in via VPNs. And we had a support team that rotated by the hour of the day and by geography. What we did is we created a virtual machine complex and it had one virtual machine per customer of ours, which had an always-on logged-in VPN, and then we had our own remote desktop into that. It was a bit of a don't ask, don't tell environment. Our customers maybe kind of knew that, maybe we didn't volunteer that, but ultimately that's a big risk because ransomware gets into their network, it's now in yours. And some of these, you'll see this, I watch the Reddit for like PLC and sysadmins and so on, and you see this sort of weird question somehow. I'm trying to figure out how to share multi-factor. My customer requires a multi-factor login. I got a team of 5. How do I share the multi-factor? What they're really saying is they're sharing their account. And now they're thinking in terms of, can I get the SMS to go to everybody and use that SMS for multi-factor? It's one of the reasons I tell people to never use SMS for multi-factor. It's because you can share it. Anyway, in this case, you're going to fail the audit when somebody finds out about this. So, cybersecurity stats, I'm not going to go through thousands of lines that, underline the point that risk exists. But let's be real. Cybersecurity is an issue in all industries, in all sectors. Anything that has control, which is what cyber means, is capable of being taken over. And the industrial sector is no different than that. So every industrial control system, there's something out there. Now, sometimes they're very targeted attacks. We saw that with Stuxnet in Iran, where nation-state actors were not happy with Iran getting nuclear weapons, so they compromised the PLCs that ran the centrifuges. Sometimes it's not as targeted, but ultimately, if you have money and you have risk, you have a problem. And manufacturing is a big part of that. So in terms of the industrial control, it falls into manufacturing first. We've seen it with energy pipelines. A couple years ago, the Colonial Pipeline hack occurred. That was due to a VPN and a contractor as the underlying traversal factor, but it took down the gasoline supply of a G7 country. It's a big outcome for us. These industrial control system attacks are only going to increase. The attackers, they're competing with each other. They're going to start to get the low-hanging fruit of really rich companies with dumb people clicking on email, and eventually they're going to start to have to scrabble around the edges, and they're going to realize that, a water treatment plant, an energy pipeline, train system, they also have money. When the rubber hits the road, if they need to get their business back, they'll figure it out, and they have risk. So, this is a big problem. And ransomware, it continues to be the flag leader. It's the easiest way to get money out of someone is to just say, I took all your data. I'm going to release it to the public if you don't pay. And by the way, you don't have it anymore, so pay me. But there may be other things that they might do there. It might be just causing damage, graffiti. It could be an activist that doesn't feel that energy pipelines should be a thing. It's all bad for us. So there's got to be a better way, because otherwise I wouldn't be doing this webinar for you guys today, right? So the better way, in my opinion, is zero trust and identity federation. So what this means is zero trust is a very simple principle. I'm going to underscore this a few times in the presentation, but really it comes down to that person, that resource, individually authorized together. So who you are, what you're allowed to do, how I get you there, if that is a singular expression rather than you're allowed to get into the network. That's what zero trust means. I don't trust anything based on where you are or how you've connected to me. Federation means that I'm connecting your identity providers together. And that sounds really complicated, but it's actually really easy. Every person you work with, they already have a single sign-on identity provider. And before you start protesting, I'm going to prove it. So first of all, a lot of your partners, they already have Office 365 or Azure or Google Workplace. So that's an identity provider. Those that don't, every one of those people has a Gmail account, which is an identity provider, or a Hotmail account. You have to have a mobile phone today. So every one of those people already has an existing means of sign in with, which requires no new username and no new password. Now, what does that mean to you? Since those things aren't under your control, that's that authorization layer. So the split of responsibility is your partner controls who works for them, and you just agree to trust them on that. But you control what that person's allowed to do, which is the authorization. So that's the split of responsibility. So if partner A's person B is fired on bad terms, they take them out of their identity system, but you are already controlling what they could do. So we go down this path and we say, we're going to have single sign-on. That's how we get in. That's how the identity is presented. We're going to do multi-factor. And we're not going to make it a shareable one. We're going to make it TPM-based or YubiKey or something like that based. You create authorization rules per resource, per user, per time. It might be grant-based. Somebody says, okay, the maintenance window starting at 9 p.m., may I please have access? And you say, okay, as an unknown person coming from Siemens, the vendor doing this, okay, I grant it. It might be just always on. It might be just pinholed, outbound only for predictive analytics. But the key is there's no VPN. There's no overlapping IP. There's no inbound ports, anything like that. This is just how it works. There's a couple of questions that have popped up. I'll address those now, and then maybe feel free to ask more questions in the chat. The first one says, I have shared credentials with my contractors. Can I keep them and have a better view of who's using what? My proposal is you just get rid of shared credentials entirely. We just remove it from the lexicon. It actually doesn't make things any easier. It's actually fairly simple to do the identity federation. We make an identity-aware proxy, an identity-aware web application firewall that does that. It just makes that a non-issue. Those shared credentials, all they were really solving was, the equipment didn't have a way to sign in. When you move that into the network, it just sort of takes care of itself. The second question is, the equipment I need to reach doesn't support things you described, like multi-factor and single sign-on. How would I get around that? So, I'm not going into a deep technical presentation today, but ultimately the way you do that is with an identity-aware proxy. So let's say you have an HMI, it runs VNC. A system like ours handles the who you are and what you're allowed to do, and then it connects there automatically. Let's say that it is, programming a PLC, and you're going to use Rockwell Studio for that. Again, our system acts as a shim in order to do that. So you're not somehow upgrading those PLCs magically to support OpenID Connect and SAML. Instead, it's handled in the networking layer. The difference between that and a VPN style is the VPN style is now you have an IP that routes, go do what you want. And ours is you're doing VNC and it's read-only. Therefore, you can move the mouse, but you can't type on the keyboard. So what is Zero Trust? So Zero Trust, you've probably heard a lot about this. A whole bunch of industries have been banging this drum. The National Institute of Standards and Technology has standards for each industry on adoption of Zero Trust. There's been a set of executive orders from the current and previous White House administration directing the agencies to implement this. It's just a best practice. And in a nutshell, it's an architecture. It isn't a singular product or technology, but it always has these principles. Who is the person, down to an individual user, not shared? What are they allowed to do that's enforced in a fine-grained, granular fashion? And how do I get them there? So if you've got those three principles, if you can say user Don can have read-only access to HMI 3 at 2 p.m., that's Zero Trust. You haven't added a trust factor like any user VPN in the network can do that. That's what we're really getting at here. So the NIST standard 800-207 is one of the parents of this. They talk a lot about the details, and they've got this very complicated buzzwordy phrase. It's a term for an evolving set of cybersecurity paradigms. It's a corporate mission statement, but it really comes down to that simple who, what, how. If you can do those three things rather than have a jump box that can get to anything, then you've got Zero Trust. So why do we do this? Well, coming back to vendors and risk, the more people we have doing the more things, the more risk we have, the bigger the attack surface. So we talk about lowering the blast radius. I think in terms of what's called defense in depth. Defense in depth means I use the words like when we get attacked rather than if we get attacked. It's going to happen. So now we're going to deal with it and keep that radius small. So going back to my earlier example, if my user gets compromised and all I'm allowed to do is read-only access to one of the HMIs, the only blast radius is the attacker who got my account can read those parameters. They can't walk sideways into something else. They can't change something. So zero trust, bringing it into the smallest radius, microsegmentation that you can, is really a big why. Improved auditability is another one. So, when something bad happens, and I said when, what's the first question people are going to ask? Who was in? How long were they in? What did they get? If your answer to those is a shrug, you're going to have a bad time. If your answer instead is, let me pull up the audit logs. Okay, starting Sunday at 2 p.m., we started to have accesses to this from there, and they got 312 megabytes of data from that system, and okay, now at least you can get your heads around what's happened, because otherwise people over-assume the downside. Does that mean they own our entire network? They've got my full customer list? Going back to what I said earlier, we talked a little bit about it's got to make things easier for folks. Zero trust can make things easier. I'm signing in with my natural identity. I sign in Don at Agilicus. I'm not entering another username and password. This is a huge enabler for me. What it means is also, from a security standpoint, it's so much easier to train users around phishing if the sign-in experience is the same and consistent for everything. As soon as you tell your users, I got 300 systems with 300 different sign-in techniques, you're done. Anybody can spear phish you and just claim to be something, and the user can't recognize what's going on. But when you've got a single front door that they come in through for everything. The second is BYOD. BYOD is a controversial phrase. Bring your own device. Some people think that this is the worst thing in the world. Some think it's the best. I'll let you in a secret. That vendor you work with that supports you, you can't tell them to use the hardware that you bought. It's just not going to work. There's always going to be a person in a truck who's going to pull over to the side of the road to help you out, and they're going to be on a tablet. They can't drive back to the office to help you. So any user, any network, any device, any time, any legacy application is actually an enabler. Your efficiency goes up once you've implemented a zero trust architecture. It doesn't go down. That defense in depth, and you can get more capabilities. Like I said, putting this layer in, you're never going to go and change all of your existing applications that you bought 15 or 20 years ago on these embedded systems to make them modern security architecture. And even if you did, in 5 years the definition has changed again. Having a network layer to provide that gasket takes care of it for you. And the last one is, it really helps you simplify, and by simplify I mean lower the cost of your audit and controls process. So for example, NIST 853, etc. You're going to put these things in place, and then you're going to need evidence that you're doing it. Having a system to help you with that evidence is always a good thing. So if we reimagine, like I said at the beginning, a lot of the industrial control systems were designed around the idea of the air gap. There's an infinitely trusted area inside the plant walls where everything talks to everything on a layer 2 domain, and once you're in it, you're in it. And there's an infinitely untrusted area outside it. Ironically, it might also be in the same building. It's the IT team over there. They're not allowed into the factory floor. But today's reality is that just doesn't happen. It just doesn't work. A lot of those pedestals, they have an Ethernet jack for diagnostics, and they're outside. Somebody can walk up to it. You might have wireless radios that are in there that can be hacked. You've got a jump box that traverses it. You've got this, that, and the other thing. That air gap really isn't there anymore. And we're proposing that you reimagine that air gap and put a single zero trust bastion across it so that you actually can control what comes in and out, rather than either trying to prevent anything from coming in or forcing people to come on site, or providing a VPN, which is everything. This is the middle ground that works for folks. So if we reimagine that, you end up with the situation. I'm not going to do a demo today, but normally the demo I would do is I pull up a web browser here, and I click, and I'm immediately on this HMI there, which is either VNC-based or web-based, and you can see the single sign-on process. I sign as Don at Agilicus. The site that it's in has no inbound network connectivity. It's outbound only. There's no ports open on the firewall. There's no inbound VPN, etc. So, and you can see that I can't get any further. I'm at that machine. I've signed in, but I can't do anything with the one beside it because I don't have an IP address in there. I can't ping it, etc. It just doesn't exist as a consequence. It was simple for me. It was easy to train a technician on how to do it, but also it's secure for you. So how does this reduce vendor risk? And this is the last slide. So this is the title of today's presentation, was reducing vendor risk. And some people got their backs up and said, I trust my vendors. They're not increasing my risk. They're not bad people. Those are all true statements. It's just that increased surface area. The first thing is we've gotten rid of shared accounts. We've gone with a unified authentication process. That means every person that's going to work with you, whether they work for you or they work for someone who works for you, is going to sign in the natural way, the way they would sign in their email. Harder to phish them, harder, etc. But also, when they leave their companies, that account is removed. That's your first level of defense. The second is that overbroad access is gone. The blast radius is now a single system. You can't, anyone who tries to tell you this fixes all security in the world, they're selling you snake oil. But Zero Trust is telling you that defense in depth is getting to a much smaller pinpoint. Somebody's still going to do something bad, but now it's only, plant 3, line 2, pod 5, as opposed to the company. You have an audit trail, trust plus verify. Once you can do that trust but verify, a lot of behavior becomes more aligned with your controls and process. That audit trail exists. People aren't, let me just do the right thing. No one's around. I'll just share my account with my friend. There's no reason to because it's simpler, but also there's an audit trail to prove if it's happening. You can enforce multi-factor authentication. So having that single layer there means you can say everything, even if it isn't modern, web-based, SAML, yada, 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 I can enforce that not only do I know who you are, but I know with at least 2 factors. Something you have, something you know, something you are. Multi-factor is you have to have at least 2 of those categories. So it can't be password plus PIN, that's not multi-factor. But you could choose to make it a physical device like a YubiKey plus your sign-in, or you could choose to make it your mobile phone or the TPM in your laptop. And removing the VPN means only the resource and its network protocol are accessible. So back to that blast radius, if I VPN in, I get a layer 3 address, I get an IP address, and I can perhaps move onwards, and people try to put firewall rules around to segment that and VLANs, etc. But in the Zero Trust model, literally the only thing I have is the resource I'm talking to. And the last one is, by not having shared software licenses and installed things on your partner's machines, a lot of things get simplified by that. But one of them is you're no longer in the practice of emailing each other executables to install, which means also it's harder to spear phish each other. Imagine, administrator of company A is in the practice of emailing administrator B and saying, here's a new .msi file to support me. And then imagine that I pretend to be them and I send an email that looks a lot like theirs, the email's slightly different. They're going to run it. So that gets rid of this challenge. So with that was my presentation today. I'll leave it open for a few seconds for questions. Excuse me. But that was my presentation today. It was all about Zero Trust, vendor access, risk, privilege, that envelope. This will be presented later on our website. In case you felt that I said something important, I would love for you to forward it to your friends. And as always, I'm always looking for feedback, so you can email me, don@agilicus.com, or info@, which is the company one. Whether you believe me or disbelieve me, you think I'm good, bad, ugly, right or wrong, I'd love to help you out with a challenge that you have, and so would our team. So with that, thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you all stay safe out there. Cheers. Bye-bye.